everyone gets the message that says recording in process, got it? Or leave meeting. And a bit of me thought, shall I just click leave meeting?
No, we want you.
I know it will be very cheeky of me to have done so, but no, I want to be here right now because this was actually something I was going to teach right before Pesach. Pesach, there's so much to say, so much to study and learn. And it was just like 2 days before Seder night, so I know a lot of us were just cleaning and it was just fine instead to delay it. The theme of this discussion that we'll have together it's a deep dive into one aspect that I find completely fascinating when it comes to Pesach and the Seder, and particularly one part of the Seder. And the title of this High Neighbors discussion really is Plagued by the Plagues, because they baffle me. They are very, very nasty, and they're in a certain order, and midrashically, in terms of, they have a life of their own. The rabbis take the plagues and invent all sorts of other things. And there was just some aspects of the plagues that unfolded when I was studying them again this year. I wanted to get the chance to study with people. So I thought we would dive in, and always feel free to make pun plagues here. So first of all, let's have a quick look before we do Midrash, because as you know, I live for the Midrashim. I live for when the sages look at a piece of Torah that might not make sense and say, aha, this is what's really going on and why. But first, let's just have a very quick look at 2 places in the Torah whereby we're given the hint of why the plagues are needed and who they are for. Because I think those are really the questions that we can really sink our teeth into as wonderful, clever High Neighbors participants. So we're going to look at Shemot first of all. Again, classic source there. Shemot being, the Exodus story itself, and like the oldest version, therefore, of our 10 plagues story. So we're going to dive right in. Whoop. I'm just going to share this source here. This is from chapter 7. And it is verse 4 and verse 5. So just in English, don't be shy. Would someone like to read this out aloud with a nice epic voice? Because this is God speaking here.
Sure.
Jill, please be God for us.
Oh, no. I will lay my hand upon the Egyptians, and I will take my legions, my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt with great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I stretch forth my hand over Egypt, and I will take the children of Israel out of their midst.
You've got the part, Jill.
Thank you.
Whenever I hear God, I will imagine your voice now and your face. What a beautiful goddess face there.
Okay.
Perfectly read. And again, I've got this little bullet point. So according to these verses, what is the reason, or maybe there's more than one, slash my S in a little bracket there. What is the reason given for the plagues? And this is open to anyone, not just God.
Yeah.
Well, the plagues, I think, are a mechanism to force the Egyptians to capitulate.
Right. So yeah, that's very much verse 5, isn't it? The Egyptians shall know that I am God when I do all this stuff.
And also to make the Egyptians realize the power of God.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect, yes. So it's a demonstration of God's power. It's targeted towards the Egyptians. They don't know that Adonai is Adonai, and it's going to affect them greatly. And the people will get to it's almost like an afterthought. The Egyptians will know I am God because I'm going to stretch forth my hand over them. And while this is happening, I'm also going to get to take the Israelites out. But again, it's almost like a distraction so that the Egyptians will be completely consumed with God. So it's for the sake of the Egyptians in Shemot verse 7. Then we go to Shemot 10 and have a little read here of what's going on here. Can we keep the casting the same? So, because there's more things to read later, but Jill, can you please be God again? Because you got the job.
It's a pleasure. The Lord said to Moses, "Come to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, in order that I may place these signs of mine in his midst, and in order that you tell into the ears of your son and your son's son how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and that you tell of my signs that I placed in them, and you will know that I am the Lord."
I ask the same question then to Shemot verse 10, 3 chapters later. According to these verses, what is the reason or reasons given for the plagues?
To let the Jews know that it was God that did all this.
Brilliant, Linda. It's a shift, isn't it? We get that from just, again, it's plainly there in the text. And yet I did a little help by just underlining that this is God talking to Moses. It's like it's a one-on-one. So God might be letting Moses into like, here's my plan now. But yeah, it's in order that you and all of the Jews will know who I am. And you need to know I'm the Lord. It's not really about the Egyptians anymore. The Egyptians are now the pawn. I actually love that it's the mocking the Egyptians is what's going to help the Israelites know that God is God, rather than the plagues. So in verse 1, we really have the idea that it's for Egypt, it's the Egyptians. And here we have a slight contradiction. Maybe it's not a contradiction, it might be just an addition, like Moses, look, you're my general, here's what's really going on. It's actually more important that the Israelites know that I'm God. And for the Egyptians, we're going to use them just as pawns. Any just questions, observations, or other things that are coming up for you so far? As you know, I love tangents and I love anything that appears in your mind. It's always wonderful because this is stuff we get to work through together.
Well, one of the things that has caused me wonder, I guess, is why God had to, or how it worked out that the Egyptians, I guess because the Israelites were free slave labor other than feeding them, but that God had to draw out the plagues. There had to be 10 of them before the Egyptians realized the severity with the last one. So it just seems like a long process. And I wonder if there wouldn't have been something more expeditious so that there weren't so many plagues.
Right, Jill, a real humanitarian there. And it's ghastly. There are so many plagues. And again, there's actually several quite good mainstream rabbinic responses to that question. Off the top of my head, again, I don't remember which sage said this, but it's what God wanted to do. And this is, again, still in the vein of, I want both the Egyptians and the Israelites to know that I am God. What God does is methodically touch every different aspect of the physical world. Mm-hmm. And again, there's like this, and what I'll do is actually show you just where the plagues are. I actually wrote them out here. Just to a little refresh people in case you didn't get the chance already to lean into these. But that what God has to do is say, I have dominion over the water, right? That's the blood, the frogs. But I can also have dominion over the smallest things, because the Nile is huge and great, and it's a very, very public and big thing for it to go blood red, and for the water systems to suddenly be affected. But there's tiniest little gnats. Can God put God's finger on those? Yes, it turns out God can. So God can also affect that. God, though, can also affect the big wild beasts of the plains. But also, again, the skin of humans. God can affect the weather. with hail, like the, like it's heaven and earth. God is affecting all the different bits in the middle, the wind, the sky, underground, as the animals come up, like the frogs, kind of come up and erupt. And then, of course, it's the food gets affected. Even the sun gets blotted out. And then finally, human life. It's like a kind of, it's a big, powerful demonstration of God can do everything. And again, a lot of that was because that the Egyptians had so many gods in their corner. So it's one God versus many, many gods. And what happens is that each of these areas actually have different gods in charge of those places. So the wild beasts, you had a different god who was in charge of the wild beasts than the god who was in charge of water. So at every point, the Jewish God has to kind of do battle and say, fine, I can beat your water god. But for the Egyptians, can you beat my cattle god, my sheep god, my crocodile god, my weather god, like the thunder god? So this god has to do battle many, many different times. And that's why that even once God kind of taps out one force, another one, it's kind of still important to bring up to bat and say, aha, this too is my dominion. That's at least one understanding of it as well. There's also the idea that it's they mirror the days of creation, at least the first few. There's like a very cool thing. Again, they're in reverse order, but that you've got darkness and light. It's all kind of becomes undone. How our God first creates darkness and light and then separate the water from the land. And then you've got the trees and the vegetation and everything slowly, that gets kind of disgusting. As God says, I can basically undo creation. So follow me, otherwise the world will be destroyed. So that's how the Jewish people can know this God as well. But yeah, it's again, it's just, and then if you want the biblical criticism response, do you want to hear a bit of biblical crit?
Sure.
Yeah, you're all mature enough to handle that. There's a theory that originally there were only 3 plagues. And again, this would be a whole other class, but the Hebrew language used in certain plagues changes and shifts and repeats. Because if you notice, in some moments, it's Aaron coming in and doing it with the staff. Other times it's Moses, and other times it's the finger of God. And what actually happens is that originally there were just 3 plagues, and they were the classic plagues. And I think the original 3, if I can remember, were, I think it was something like, I think it might have been blood. I think it was like saying blood, hail, and darkness. It was very just kind of big epic weather plagues that just affected the water, the sky, the whole land. And that's enough for Pharaoh to say, oh my God, I believe you, get out. And then later authors added plagues. And then another author added even more plagues until it becomes all sorts of things. Because some of these are almost repetitive. The idea as well that you have like animals up here at least twice. And the idea, and this blight, this dever as well. Dever is kind of sickness of the animals. But you've also got arov, like wild beasts, like what's going on there? Like they're a bit confused. So it may actually be that there was originally just a couple of plagues, and to make the story more epic, and also to get to the number 10, to kind of parallel maybe the 10 commandments, and just to really batter the Egyptians, the story got bigger and wilder until it does become overwhelming, because you or I, or any sensible pharaoh, would have gotten rid of those slaves after one of these, let alone 3, let alone 6, let alone 10.
Does this have anything to do with when God hardened Pharaoh's heart? Because I think at the beginning there was no hardening of the heart, but then that was added.
That's a really good question, because this is another thing that happens, a parallel to the plague story, which is Pharaoh. We notice our main character here, who may be responsible. And again, this would be a different thing that we would take out of the text. this could all be Pharaoh's fault. This whole thing could be a teaching about stubbornness, about the inability to see reason or the inability to admit when you're losing. Because every so often, it's not at every plague, but it's about every 3 or 4, Pharaoh's heart gets hardened. What's very, very painful to us, and I think would be painful to Jill, is that God says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart, meaning that it doesn't seem like Pharaoh even does it at all, but that God is using Pharaoh as a pawn. But then at one point, it does say that Pharaoh hardens his own heart, which also could be that it's because of habit, that this is something Pharaoh's just too stubborn to admit, I was wrong, I needed to let them go. But parallel to this whole account of God seems at the very beginning, in Shemot 7, I'm going to do all of these plagues to assert my authority over everything, and that the Egyptians and the Israelites are going to know who I am. But that we've also got this individual struggle going on, whereby Pharaoh at every point is almost given the opportunity, you can let them go. And he constantly says, no, 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 no. But what he does do is he allows Moses to take them out a little bit. At some point by plague 7, he actually says, you can go to the wilderness over there and celebrate a holiday, but you have to come back, and you can't take your animals, or you can take your women, but you can't take your men. And Pharaoh actually does bargain. And again, I'll show you this in the text a little later if we have time, because I didn't want to go too deeply into the plague narrative, because that's actually pages and pages. Like, the plagues take a really long time to happen. But there is this bargaining and negotiating. But what I wanted to do with this, with your permission, and I'm loving these questions so far, is just to have a look again back to this question of why are the plagues being given, and whose sake is it for, and what could be going on. So I wanted us to have a quick fun look at Midrash Tanhuma, just because it's quite a fun little source there, and build up a picture of what's going on. So could I have a reader to just volunteer to take us through this?
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you, Shirley.
All right. Why did God first bring upon them the plague of blood? Because Pharaoh and the Egyptians worshiped the Nile. The Holy One said to Moshe, go and strike their God. Behold, I will strike. Rabbi Avin ha-Levi said, Israel became enriched from the plague of blood. How so? An Egyptian and an Israelite were found in one house, and the tank was full of water. The Egyptian would go fill a pitcher from it, and it turned into blood. And the Israelite would go and drink the water from it. So the Egyptian would say, give me a little water in your hand. And he would give him, but in the hand of the Egyptian, it was found to be blood. Then he would say to him, come you and I, let us drink from the bowl. But the Israelite would drink water, and the Egyptian would drink blood. Still, when the Egyptian would purchase water from the Israelite, he would drink water. Therefore, Israel became enriched from the plague of blood.
So it was all a scam. The Israelites just said, well, this is how we'll sell them water. What do people make of this incredible source here?
Oh, well, I think all these plagues are just to show him who's boss. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to bedevil you at every turn. But I think the worst one of all was the killing of the firstborn. That really hit home. The others, oh, they're nuisances. Maybe we can put up with it. Maybe it'll end. But when it comes to taking one of your own, then it's a whole different ball game. Then they know this is for real now. This has got to end.
Yeah, 100%. It's very different, that 10th plague, which is, again, why it's 10th, why it's the worst, why it's what breaks Pharaoh and the Egyptians. And again, we would all agree that, like, the loss of life, the loss of a child, even an adult child, it's just beyond. But yes, this midrash is again staking that claim that these are to show who's boss. This is God saying to Moses, go and strike their God. Right? That's actually quite quite saucy, because that's suggesting that there are other gods, but that this is a lesser god. Again, this is a lowercase god. Go and strike their god. Because again, the Egyptians understood multiple different gods in their system, in their pantheon of worshippers. And, they needed to strike in different places. But really, it's about God belief. Like, I'm not quite sure if in that very early suggestion that this is for the sake of the Egyptians feeling that our God is more powerful, or if it's actually I need to attack their God, right? That it's the gods doing battle. Or if it's no, we know there isn't really more than one God. What's happening here is the Egyptians just have a faulty belief system. They're worshiping the Nile. I need to assert that I can control it and make it red. And again, you feel like the Egyptians are quite stubborn as a people. And by the way, everyone would be. It's not just one single race would be stubborn. But in this story, it takes time for them to, I think, believe that this is really happening. Oh, this could be a coincidence. I happen to have blood in my picture here. And just the miracle gets deeper and deeper. It's not just the Nile. It's the idea that in your own home, you can turn on a faucet, or, you go and you find the water that's been stored, and it's blood. And the Egyptians are then really realizing that we're not just dealing with a show. Because, and again, we'll actually look at a kind of counter source to this in a little while. It just could be, that the Nile was red for natural reasons. It's a coincidence. It wasn't God. It's not a miracle. But again, here we're showing it must be a miracle, because look, the Israelites would drink from the same water, and for them, it wouldn't turn to blood. So that takes deliberation and effort and choice. And it also shows a God who's really conscious and paying attention to these little things. It's a pretty cool miracle. It's not just boom, red over here, but it's, oh, wait, that Egyptian, wait, let me make that pure water. Let me add some nice electrolytes for that Egyptian, etc. So
the Israelites also made a prophet.
Yes. And not just the prophet Moses, but they made a monetary profit, which is brilliant, because they're going to need it, because they need to be strengthened. They need to have possessions and stuff so that when they go out of Egypt, they can look after themselves. And it's a power shift, isn't it? It's humiliating. Your Egyptians are at the top of the system, and your slaves are underneath. And what has to happen again, it's this whole long process of changing the hierarchy. And the Egyptians are made low, they're made vulnerable, and the Israelites are made like to be boss, to be powerful, and to be no longer seen as slaves. And I wonder if that's for the other Egyptians, or if that's the Israelites themselves, like to give them higher self-esteem. Because as we also saw, back to Shemot number 10, it's I don't know if the real battle is actually for the Israelites themselves. They need to know that God is God. They need to understand the severity of this. They need to be inspired to want to leave and to see themselves as more than slaves. So there's something very powerful about, ooh, I made a living. I got paid. Because, by the way, being paid means you're no longer really a slave. So there's actually something psychological going on in that source, I think. It's a really good observation.
I have a question. Have you read anywhere in any literature how much time elapsed between each plague?
I think the Torah itself, and I can pull it up, but the Torah itself, let me just stop screen sharing so you won't see the mess that will happen briefly as I pull it up. But the plagues themselves definitely take a while. Like within the Torah itself, some of the plagues take 3 days to happen, or a week even. I know the darkness lasts for 3 days. So it's not this kind of instant. It takes a long time. There's a build-up. Joette, have you got your Chumash with you? I think someone else has a Chumash as well. But feel we can.
Yes.
But how much time was there between blood And
Huh?
is it frogs that are the next one?
So one's got one. I'm gonna get one.
Hang on.
What chapter am I looking in? What chapter am I looking in?
Let's have a look at the first plague, which would be
Oh,
we've got the serpent staff happening Shemot. So yeah, but in the middle of chapter 7, in Shemot, we've got and I can screenshot like verse 19 and 20. We've got the plague of blood happening. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch forth your hand over the waters," and the entire land is covered. And let's just see, they did. Yeah, Pharaoh goes home after this and doesn't pay attention to it. The Egyptians they dig around the Nile for water to drink because they couldn't drink the water of the Nile. And that's actually where we have this Midrash Tanhuma stepping in to say, well, they're clearly going to be dead if they don't have any water. So they actually go to the Israelites to give them their water source. And it does feel, so go to chapter 8 to see how much time elapsed. Yeah, so yeah, not at every point do we see if there's any time. The plagues 1 to 2 seem to be somewhat following.
Well, on chapter 7, verse 25, when 7 days had passed after the Lord struck the Nile. So that was,
Oh,
That's
okay.
so
very
that
specific.
one lasted for 7 days.
Right. And then it looks like there's another, things happen on the next day. The first several plagues, Moses gives Pharaoh a heads up and says, just so you know.
Yeah,
This
and
is
then the
going to
frogs will
happen.
come.
Yeah, so you've got, verse 5, Moses says to Pharaoh, behold, this is going to happen to you. And it's going to happen tomorrow. So again,
Okay.
we've got an extra day reprieve of, do you really want to think about this? He says, lemachar, vayomel lemachar, it's going to happen tomorrow. That's your deadline. There's going to be no one like God. The frogs are going to happen. And yeah, then it's going to happen later. And they stink. But yeah, Pharaoh sees there's relief. And again, here's our proof here of, this is at this point, so we're only at plague 3, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. It feels like God kind of gives him the initial push, but Pharaoh takes it from there. And again, we don't know how long. You're right. Like, it's a great question, Jill, because I think it would affect a lot of questions. Did this take a really long time? Was it months and months, or was it kind of pretty instant and very out of control?
This doesn't indicate how long until the lice.
No, it just says, and then it happens, and then there was lice, and then it happens. So that's a great question. I'm sure there's a midrash at some point that says, each plague lasted a week or each a month or something like that.
Right.
So hold on to that question, because it's a beautiful one. It's always really exciting when there's a question that, there isn't a mainstream rabbinic answer to. So let's have a look. Yeah, it just says, therefore, Pharaoh summoned Moses, and that happens. Yeah, notice this here. I love this. Moses asks, let us go for a 3-day journey in the desert so we can sacrifice to our God. And Pharaoh says, I'll let you go out, and you can sacrifice to God, but don't go far away. Don't go too far away. Just go where I can see you, just to the parking lot. And Moses says, I need to go away. I need to go far, far, far away.
It does say tomorrow.
Yeah, it's kind of boom, boom, boom. Again, the next source that I'd love us to look at, because that is quite thrilling, is I think, let's have a look at the naturalistic explanation next, because that gives us not quite a time frame, but it gives us the logic of why the plagues are in this order, and that they do follow one from the other. So let me get us there.
You're muted. Marty, you're...
Yeah, I have a source here that says the plagues took about 40 days.
Of course.
I don't know
That would
why
make-
40, because it's our magic number, probably.
Right, that's Marty, well done, because that's brilliant. And that I love, obviously the number 40 is such a number of completeness of this is what it takes for epic things to happen. You know, there are so many 40s in the Torah. So
In case you read, you want something more specific, February 1st to March 22nd. 1446 BCE.
Brilliant. Oh, Marty, that's perfect. I love that. So you know what? I will teach that in the future of saying, you know what? Not the specific dates there, but the idea that it was 40 days, because that is it's a unit of time that's like a sacred unit of time, in order for things to get shifted. So that was how long it took for the flood to happen in the Noah story. You know, the 40 days and 40 nights for the getting of the 10 commandments. Elijah, the prophet, was said to be in the desert for 40 days with his revelation to God. There's both like public and private revelations. 40 years is how long they spend in the desert. There's a lot of 40s. So I love that the plagues could have taken 40. So that's beautiful here. Yeah, let's have a look, unless there's any other observations, because this will, I just enjoy this. There are scholars all over the place in Jewish belief. Some who are very supernatural and moralistic, and look to the plagues and say, you know, lessons can be learned. This was all about humility. This was a lesson to Pharaoh, or, you know, this is all about how God has God's finger in every aspect of life, whether it's heaven and earth, the sea and the sky. And then there's also people who say, I will still believe in Judaism, in the Torah, in God as a creator, but I actually think that it was something that happened naturally, because again, it's too painful to me. And again, this comes to Jill's question of comment even, of just, it's so painful to think that these 10 things deliberately happened to humans. And again, the Egyptians were following orders, which in itself is a chilling statement. You know, that they are culpable for the sinning that they did. But again, if this was an established system, it was something that a little boy slave and a little boy taskmaster, they just grew into, they inherited it. It's very hard to crack open a system and change when that's all you've known. And also slavery happened. It was the norm. There was no such thing as women voting, and there was no such thing as not having slaves. So, you know, we can have a little bit of rahmanas, of mercy when we talk about the Egyptians. You know, did they really deserve it? Even if they were all taskmasters and brutal, that was the system, that was the culture that had been created for a really long time. But 10 is so many, said Jill at the very beginning. How did they not get the message? They were battered. It's obvious. Like after plague 3, you'd be really impressed. So some scholars choose to say, you know what? These happen naturally. So let's have a look at what that could look like. I'd love to have a reader to take us through at least a couple of these.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you. Is that Gary?
Yes. The plagues happened at the same time as a massive volcanic eruption. The volcano Santorini sent ash into the air, affecting the surrounding area. The ash is found in Cairo and the Nile River, proven by testing the composition of the ash. The volcanic eruption happened between 1500 and 1650 BC, while the plagues happened between 1400 and 1550 BC, so it fits there. It also validates Marty as a timeline. The first plague, the river ran red like blood, but there is a common algae plume called the red tide. This makes the river or any water look red like blood. Why did this happen? The ash changes the pH level of the river, allowing the algae to bloom. Oh, fiddle faddle. Frogs. The algae is killing fish. Fish eat frog eggs. No fish, record number of frogs. Frogs can't live in polluted water, and so they leave the river. Third and fourth plague, lice and flies. The translation can actually be lice, fleas, gnats, or midges. But you have a river full of dead fish and now dead frogs. This brings the insects of the third and fourth plague. Fifth plague, pestilence, flies, dead frogs, dead fish. Easy enough? No? Boils, certain types of flies that bite can leave behind boils. The bites get infected and they turn into boils. Fire and hail. Ash in the air causes a mixture of ash and water. The ash, very high in the air, causes the water to freeze. So when it falls, it is hail and not rain. The fire, I saw this amazing picture in National Geographic of a volcanic eruption. There was red lightning. It was so amazing to see, bright red lightning. Why is it red? Chemicals in the ash make red lightning. So fire in the sky and hail. I don't quite buy that. I have to comment. When Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines erupted, there was enough ash that turned the sky reddish, orange reddish. But
that's totally okay. And again, by the way, this is not my comment specifically. This is someone, Jordana, we'll see her name, who wrote this little bit at the bottom of the article.
Okay.
But again, so but just kind of follow along with it, because different places, different types of volcanic eruptions. It's possible that the fire that is described in the seventh plague actually came from the ash, that erupted in a certain way, and particularly in certain times of year when the moon is low and big, or there's like clouds in the sky anyway. The sky itself can look red. So yeah, just go with it. But you're absolutely right. It might not be exactly red.
Okay. Eighth plague, locusts. Locusts come about when the ground is very damp. They bury their eggs in the sand about 4 to 6 inches. After a record amount of hail, the ground would be very wet, allowing the locusts to form. Ninth plague, darkness, ash in the air. After an eruption in 1815, there was a darkness for 600 kilometers. After Krakatoa, it was dark for even further for days. 10th plague, death of the firstborn. In Egypt, the firstborn were like kings. They would be the one to lead the family after the father died. When food was scarce, the firstborn ate first and sometimes was the only one to eat. After locusts ate everything, there was only grain locked in vaults. The hail got it wet and moldy, and the locust feces contaminated the grain supplies. And so when only the firstborn ate, they were the only ones killed by the moldy grain.
Oh.
So we've got, that was Jordana Goodman. And I found that on hugger.com, which was just fascinating. But yeah, what do we think about that? Again, knowing that some of these are a bit more tangential, a bit more far-fetched, but I think, there's definitely a reasonable stab at logic and consequences, and the idea that one plague will naturally lead to the next, and that it's a somewhat logical order, particularly with the idea that the fish, the fish die. Loads of dead fishies, that's going to bring flies. The fish normally eat froggies' eggs, but with no, it's like it's the food chain. If you remove some of those animals, in the middle of the food chain, it destroys the natural balance. And so many of the plagues are actually about different types of animals, big or small. And then when you have a deficit of certain animals, you have an abundance of others. And that also affects the human beings living around them, and the food supply, in terms of plant life. And the weather will affect things very naturally. So again, were there things in here that people enjoyed or really take issue with? Or again, like it's a revelation maybe?
Well, that begs the whole Exodus story again.
Yes.
This is our central myth, if you will, of the Jewish people, and this effort to explain it as a natural phenomenon further removes our essence of being. So I don't like this.
Thank you. And you're allowed not to like it. And you're right. Like we just read that the plagues are all about us trying to know God, and that it was a miracle, and it was incredible. And instead to hear this, it can be a real downer. Like, I didn't teach this text at my Seder. It would be a real like, God didn't do it. Although, you can still reinsert God even into this naturalistic explanation by saying, but who invented fish? Who invented the whole ecosystem? The ecosystem falls apart when something like a volcano erupts. And maybe it was the eruption, the volcanic eruption, the trigger that maybe God had a hand in. But the problem with saying God caused these plagues at this time is, well, did God not cause other plagues at other times? And did God really want to do so much damage? But again, I just like the thinking, the domino effect of this, I think fascinates me. And again, I wasn't there. This isn't proof or fact either. These are just people. I think she was a geologist or someone who looked at these kind of issues. But Jill, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, in a way, a lot of people talk about how hard it is to believe in a God that would allow genocide like the Holocaust. If you believe that God has an active role in the world, how did that happen? If you believe that God created man to make choices, whether they're good choices or bad choices, but God sort of stands back, this is similar in that God created the world. He created the river, he created all these animals and everything. And then he stood back, and some of these natural phenomena happened to occur, one building on another. So I don't reject these reasons, because I think it speaks to people who maybe want to be part of the culture and don't believe that God has an active hand in everything that we do.
I do really take comfort in that 10th plague suggestion, because it's traumatic to think that God would send an angel of death to kill and destroy every firstborn in every household, no matter what, just if you were Egyptian. That's racist right there. Whether or not you beat up several Jews that day at work, or you're actually quite a merciful taskmaster, it's horrifying. It makes us real. Like that 10th plague is too much to stomach. And the idea in this naturalistic explanation of, well, what is it that the firstborns all had in common? Because you have to explain it one way. And I love the idea that, well, and again, this would be looking at how Egyptian society is structured. The firstborn, they were at the head of the household. They were the ones who would fight in the army. They were the strongest. And in a time of famine and depletion, they of course would be given the lion's share of the food. You're not going to give your 8-year-old daughter food, because she's not going to survive anyway by herself. You need to have your name, your legacy carried on. And if you have to look at it from a scientific way, if we are to believe that the firstborns all dropped dead at the same time, to be able to make the story make sense, there has to be something that happened. And I love the idea that they all got mass food poisoning because their grain supplies were contaminated, and that it was only those individuals because they were the ones who were given the grain. Because if we look at it, there's the other explanation. If that 10th plague happened, what's the only other explanation? If we take an active God out of the story, how is it that a lot of firstborn males die on the same night?
Or it didn't happen at all.
Or it didn't happen at all. But if it did happen, what's the only rational explanation for it happening?
Well, there's not an only. We've
what's
now heard two.
The most rational, if it looks like a horse and smells like a horse, it's not a zebra. You're all very, very sweet for not going there. But the only other, the most rational explanation for how the 10th plague could have happened, if it happened, is if the Israelites killed the firstborn Egyptians. we're allowed to think of this so many different ways. Either the angel of death did it, if we want to believe that God is doing that, or it didn't happen. Completely, again, another belief. This is a story. This got embellished and exaggerated. This became mythic. The plagues expanded and grew bigger and deeper because we wanted to teach that God is ultimately responsible for everything. Or we could find some kind of crazy reason as to why a certain segment of society all dropped dead, allowing the Israelites to flee, and say it was the grain, something else weird happened. They all took a pact, Or if we want to maintain the integrity of that 10th plague and say, yes, it happened, but naturally, the only logical explanation is someone killed them all. Who, look around, who possibly would want to kill Egyptian firstborns, the taskmasters? Who would need to kill them? The people trying to escape them, who were stronger because they weren't being affected by the other plagues quite so much. And if you actually think about it, if you reimagine the story as a rebellion, as a revolution, or as a coup, the Israelites, they're not passive. They're being told, slaughter those lambs, wipe the blood of these lambs that represented gods to Egyptians on the doorposts of your houses publicly. That's, and again, if we're taking out the angel of death, why are they doing that? It's a war cry. We are publicly killing your gods. If they're willing to do that, then of course they're willing to kill the Egyptians. And again, what's beautiful, maybe the word beautiful is too much, but what's at least compassionate is they're not killing every Egyptian, right? Who are they killing? The brutal ones, the eldest, the firstborn males, i.e. the ones who are propping up society. They're not killing the women and children, or the babies, or the elderly. We're not Amalek. But the Jewish people, and again, we weren't called Jews then. I use that term always just because I'm lazy, really, the Israelites. Again, for them to have left and followed Moses into freedom by their own hands, they must have done something to leave. They must have, in the middle of the night, killed their masters and then been able to leave, particularly if the Egyptians had been suffering from famine and lots of other things had gone really badly and there was weakness and it was dark. If there was a volcano, something triggered some natural events to occur. The Israelites got together, or Moses, the ringleader says, all right, now's the time to leave. It's just as impressive. And we could even still rewrite God back in that story by saying, God is inside us and gave them the courage to see themselves as sacred and as worthy of starting new lives and shaking off their oppressors and going back to their ancient land of Israel, where they used to be. But again, it's quite a bold suggestion, but that's another idea. I just wanted to teach you.
There's no age minimum on killing the firstborn.
That is Pharaoh's.
You could have a 2-year-old firstborn. Wouldn't that count? Because that 2-year-old could grow up to be a slave master.
True. And again, if we're getting technical, then yes, it could well be that this plague really meant every single firstborn ever. But I put it to you that if you're a firstborn, you probably already have siblings in the mix, because then you're not the lastborn or the youngest, because if you're an only child and therefore a young child, first, smallest, that there are ways to kind of say that when we mean firstborn, what we're really saying is the people who are going to be taking over from the parents when they go, and that I'm hoping there was an age limit, and I'm imagining young men rather than a tiny baby that's just been born. So again, you're also right, and that would also mean that the angel of death would know that. If we want to go to the angel of death could really pick out, because it's supernatural, anyone who was the firstborn. But in this other telling, it's the idea of those who are oldest, who are the top, who are the head of, in some ways, firstborn is the head of your household, but not the older father. It's, the young men. And again, there's no proof. We don't know if this happened or not. These are just many different possibilities. And what I want to do, because we've still got a few minutes, I want to end on a miraculous possibility, because my favorite interpretation of the 10 plagues is as follows. And we'll study that together just briefly because it's wonderful. And again, none of these are right necessarily. I'm sure some of these are wrong. But they're all deliberate. And, the sages come together and try to explain a really horrifying part of the Jewish story, which is, again, as Gary said, it's one of our central texts. It's our master story, but it always makes me very uncomfortable. I'm plagued by the plagues. I hate thinking that our God would do this, and maybe it's necessary, and maybe it proves a point, and maybe it doesn't actually happen in exactly the way it goes down. But I want to have a look at this final wonderful idea that is going to create a parallel as to, again, looking at the order of the plagues, because there is something very deliberate in the order of the plagues. So who would like to read this? It's a little bit long. Could you, Joette, I haven't heard your voice enough today and I crave it.
Sure. The Holy One brought the plagues upon Egypt with the tactics of warrior kings. What does a king of flesh and blood do when a city rebels against him? He sends troops to encircle it. Then he shuts off their water conduit. If its people surrender, he desists. But if not, he brings loud noises upon them to confuse them. If they surrender, he desists. But if not, he shoots arrows at them. If they surrender, he desists. But if not, he sets savage units upon them. If they surrender, he desists. But if not, he deprives them of their source of food. If its people surrender, he desists. But if not, he flings burning naphtha upon them. If they surrender, he desists. But if not, he catapults stones at them. If they surrender, he desists. But if not, he arrays multitudes of wall climbers against them. If they surrender, he desists. But if not, he takes captives and imprisons them. If they surrender, he desists. But if not, he slays their leaders and nobles. So too at the beginning, the Holy One shut the Egyptians' water conduits. He turned their rivers to blood. Since they did not surrender, he brought loud noises to confuse them. Frogs, whose croaking was very hard for the Egyptians to endure, for entering the Egyptians' innards, they kept up their croaking. Oy. Since they did not surrender, he shot arrows at them, gnats, which penetrated their bodies of the Egyptians like arrows. Since they did not surrender, he brought savage units upon them, swarms of wild beasts. Since they did not surrender, he deprived them of their source of food by sending murrain, of which their cattle died. Since they did not surrender, he flung burning naphtha at them, skin boils. Since they did not surrender, he catapulted stones at them, hail. Since they did not surrender, he released multitudes of wall climbers upon them, locusts. Since they did not surrender, he put them in prison, darkness. Since they still did not surrender, he slew the leaders and nobles among them. The Lord smote all the first in rank. Do you want me to go on?
No, that's fine. I wanted to look up what this naphtha was. So it's when they would fling these kind of gross tar thingies at people like weapons. But yes, what do we have to say about this very cool analogy? Let's go back to the front.
Sounds like Ukraine.
It's brutal. And again, it's speaking in the language of the time, isn't it? This is not actually 100% how we fight, but there's definitely elements of how we would fight today, or the idea of taking captives and imprisoning people, and meeting people on the battlefield. But in a siege, this is what would happen. And again, it kind of reminds me a bit of Jill's earlier question or comment, even of like, how long did this take? A siege takes quite a long time. And you have to kind of shut people out one by one, like, let's cut off your water supply, let's cut off your food. Fine, you're still refusing to surrender. We're going to try to actually topple your city walls. We're going to penetrate them. We're going to climb up to you. We're going to try to make you be deprived of sleep by just banging and giving you constant noise. You know, it's a form of torture. And then, right, we're going to send in the biggest and brightest. And then finally, we're going to kill the people who are in control. And in charge. And then when you've got no king, you're going to have to surrender, because that's, you know, checkmate. It's an incredible analogy. I just like shivers to me when I read it for the first time. The idea of like, that's the order of the plagues, that it's siege tactics, and that God is fighting a holy war, and that the people of both Egypt and Israel would recognize this. Battles were fought and won or lost. And, you know, these were war tactics here that God personally does. Because again, in this moment, we go back to a little bit the very first text. God needs to say, know me, but not just know me as a creator, you know, but actually know me as someone who is stronger, know me as someone who is a warrior. Because this is the type of God, unfortunately, that we are presented with in the Pesach story. And you think about the Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam. We're told that very early on, Adonai ish milchama, Adonai shemo. The Lord is a master of war. The Lord is his name. God is a war God. And that's the language that the Egyptians finally understand. And maybe that's the language that the Israelites also understand. You know, it's not this kind of lovely thing of, I can control the bunny rabbits and the trees. But no, I'm the strongest God. I can punch out your other gods. I'm going to war. I'm going to win. I've got my army, my shields, my catapults. I've got my arrows. And again, if we had more time, I would have shown you this excerpt from Lord of the Rings, the Battle of Helm's Deep. Hands up if you have seen Lord of the Rings.
Probably.
Well done to those who have. It's, again, this is a kind of medieval battle, but there's a siege of Helm's Deep, and I'll just give you a couple of things. But you've got the spears, you've got the walls. They make very loud noises. They bang their weapons on the ground for a long time to kind of disturb the enemy. Like literally, you see all of the tactics in this battle. And they literally have fire that they rain down. They set fire, obviously, to the mud and to concoctions to create explosions. And they have ladders. And they climb the walls. Again, like I wish. And yeah, they shoot the arrows. They climb the walls just like the locusts. They penetrate and then they kill. They break the siege. Literally using every single tactic of the 10 plagues. According to that analogy. And again, it's not necessarily a comfortable one for modern sensibilities, that Adonai in this moment had to prove worthy. But this is, again, in terms of ancient beliefs, you wanted to ally yourself to the toughest God, to the God that controlled the most. And in some ways it is very holy and respectful. I'll be done in 2 minutes, my love, and it's okay. But yeah, it's a literal battle, you know, and it might be a spiritual battle, like this is for the Israelite souls. But I know that I love that analogy. That was very bold, and it casts them in a very different light as to not only the order of the plagues, but why they had to happen and what they're saying. Because I don't know, for us, you know, we do have quite a spiritual, beautiful version of Adonai. But for those people back then, to know God, what did you need to know? That your God would protect you and fight for you, and it was about survival, that you would need to survive. And as you know, the Israelites freak out in the desert. We're going to die. Is God still with us? Is God mighty enough? Is God a warrior? And that God has to appear as a cloud of fire by day and smoke by night, which again, these are weapon imageries that we forget about this, but that I think is the language that would have spoken to those people. It's also, again, quite an early, I don't even know if it's the Orties, basically, at the time of the rabbis writing, they would understand warfare. They were living through sieges, like the sieges of Jerusalem, the Bar Kokhba revolts, like breaking the hole through the temple for Som Gedalia. This was generations of military generals and conquests. So the idea of saying God was the ultimate warrior and was the God of war in this moment is, again, quite chilling, doesn't feel quite Jewish. And we very minimize this in the Passover Haggadah and in the story. We focus on the freedom and the liberation. But I know it's quite an epic tale. And if you think of other Mesopotamian epic tales, all the gods are war gods to some extent, and they battle each other. So yeah, I just wanted to present that. It's one of my favorite midrashim of all time, I think. Again, particularly because I like to picture Lord of the Rings and that battle there as well. But we've got to the end of our time session. There's so much more to say, but I just wanted to just open up the floor if there were any final lasting comments or blows.
It was real interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're most welcome, Jill. Thank you.
It puts things in a different light altogether.
I think that there's something to be said for just accepting the story as it's presented in the Bible and not looking for explanations of how it could happen. It gives us pause to think about God. That's true. But the whole idea is to show God's power and God's feeling for the Jewish people, or the Israelites as they were. And I don't know. I just don't think we need to go in a direction of making it like, did it really happen? The whole point is just to learn something from the story. So did it really happen? And if so, how could it have happened? It's not important to me.
I completely agree.
I read several archaeologists' report where they said the same thing about the Nile, the same explanation about how the Nile got red. And also, I don't know if you heard, but they found the wheels of the Cherokees, lots of them. Yeah, it was a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So
wow.
yes, the story must be real, maybe some of it.
But yeah, I love that. And this is it, that there are answers. I also love Joette's point, and I do want to end there because I think that's actually one of the most powerful things we can say, which is at the end of the day, does it matter? And did we waste an hour of trying to pick apart, why did it happen? Could it have happened? If so, how? What does it mean? Because at the end of the day, particularly with those stories, and particularly with how this myth operates in our psyche and is meant to inspire us as Jews, it's not about the minutiae. Like, you don't need to sweat the details. It doesn't matter too much if it lasted 2 days or 5, or was it the frogs or the fish that smelt the worst, or any of those things. It's at the takeaway, like, we're missing the point. We're missing the trees, the forest for the trees kind of thing. It's about the miracle of freedom, of coming together, of being saved, and of aligning ourselves with Adonai, of finding the one true God, and of coming together as a people and being brave enough to leave, and how some of the Egyptians came with us because they chose Adonai. Like, they agreed and said, yep, this is a better God than the gods we had. And you're right, and then it becomes about our sense memories of what Pesach feels like and tastes like, and it influences our lives in a different way to all of us. And you're right, at the end of the day, this is fun. This is like fun for the rabbis. Like, the rabbis didn't go out much and they didn't have video games. So this was what the rabbis would do in their spare time, of debate and suggest. And this is something I love to do, which is why I was like, I want to be a rabbi, because I like thinking about this. Because to me, I get bothered of like, did this really happen? What does that make God if it did happen? But I also like to take that step back and holistically say, yeah, but how, what really is this story? Because it is a story. And I love that, for you, Joette, that's what matters, that the overall message And meaning can be gotten on so many different levels, just like the emotional level of, you know, this was a successful story. It was a victory. You know, or again, it could be about belief or whatever. Again, we could go round and round, and it's definitely a really acceptable thing to then say, and it's all okay. It doesn't matter that there are inconsistencies, and we don't want to pick it apart. You know, there's a couple of suggestions when it comes to even studying Torah, and one of the suggestions is, if you have nothing that kind of bolsters the Torah up, don't even bother saying it. You know, don't pick apart the Torah, because the Torah is so beautiful and so awesome and spectacular, and it's our book, whether we like it or not. And with all of its flaws and imperfections, it's our history book, it's our genealogy, it's our legacy. You know, we don't need to batter it. So it's okay if it doesn't all make sense, and we like it when it challenges us. So just again, because I want to honor the fact that other people might have places to go, things to do, I want to kind of wrap things up at this point, but I want to say a big thank you for just thinking through these epic themes and allowing me to suggest many different things that definitely are going to make different people uncomfortable, you know, whether it's a naturalistic version or a non-naturalistic version, because some people don't want to think of God as doing that, or of us having to pick it apart in the first place. So thank you, my delightful high neighbors, for a scintillating discussion of the plagues.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.